Oh, hello, brother Bloom.
Hello, my long lost cousin Bloom. How are you?
Cousin Bloom, Sam, it is so good to see you. I'm really excited to have you on the OhHello pod. It's very special to have an advertising, marketing, media legend come on our pod. So thank you. It's fun to have family, just being cousins, as we constantly tell everybody in our space. Maybe we're not cousins, maybe we are. Who knows?
I think it's fair to say that we're from the same tribe, but
Yeah,
and related genetically, but we're not sure how. You know,
very well said. Well, we have similar demeanors, so that's a good thing. But I've had the pleasure of knowing you. I'd love to get to know you more and deeper, and we will in this conversation. And for those that are new to watching this pod, those that are new to listening, who do I have the pleasure of speaking with right now? Who are you?
okay. Who am I? Well, so I'm Sam Bloom, and I lead partnerships here at P&G. For those that don't know me, I mean, I how I got here a little bit is I was lucky enough to run an agency called Camelot, which we purchased from the original founders. I have two business partners. I'd been there for 21 years. And so, I've been in this advertising space for a while, and then, startups, consultancies, Blockbuster, a whole
Yep.
bunch of things prior to that. But, I was very fortunate. I think most people sort of think of, me in this business is that, I started a digital unit at Camelot when digital didn't exist, and just right place, right time, and kind of stumbled into lots of stuff. And so, you know, I'd like to think I just have 10,000 hours of kind of doing this.
Yeah, 10,000 hours, give or take. I think it's pretty special for those that didn't know that. And it's fun for you to give your own bio instead of me pumping you up because you have experienced so much in your career. And that's one of the reasons why, especially when it comes to digital advertising, digital media, advertising, ad tech, why I thought it'd be fun to have you come on talking about mentorship, talking about career advice, talking about guidance, talking about being a leader, being an executive, building teams, but also having humility, being a dad, being a husband, being a son, a neighbor, and just riding the wave, as you and I were talking about when we were having a catch up chat before we started the pod. So, who are some of the mentors that have made an impact on you?
Well, so I think the first piece is, what you may not know is I'm a third generation advertiser. My grandfather started an agency and my father ran and so forth. And I think the first piece is they were wonderful role models for me in very different ways. But I'd say for me is I've been very fortunate. Played college soccer at UVA. Bruce Arena was an incredible mentor and role model for me and continues to be. Then worked for broadcast.com as Mark Cuban. He was, Mark in many ways was a tough lesson for me, but, he's a brilliant guy. But
Tough
Tom
lesson in
Cowell,
what sense?
oh, look, I mean, I'd never really been around a tech company, and Mark, and tech companies just move fast and, make decisions quickly. And it was very decentralized. Although, Mark was the guy. I mean, I think, Mark was a guy, you couldn't be us and, on the tech. I mean, he absolutely knows his stuff on that, and he's a smart guy, and he doesn't lack confidence. And so, there's a lot of, and the other thing is, Dallas, I always say is the place where startups come to die. And broadcast.com was one of the few really successful companies out
Crushed
there.
it.
Certainly, outcome was successful. So, but, tough. I mean, we were on, card tables, and, he could hear every phone call. He'd critique every phone call. If you had documents on your table, he was tough. And, when you're early in your career, you're, under your breath, you say all kinds of things. And then, it's the same is true for coaches. The same is true
Yep.
for, any kind of, so you learn something different. But I'd say Tom Cowell, the founder of Camelot, really had just a massive influence on me. And Tom, it was a family-run business, and he ran it like a family business. And he just was a spectacular marketer, spectacular human. He's still with us, but I mean, just a guy who's just sort of everything that he did, he was very intentional on. And, I think I learned just so much. And some of it was, as a young person, Tom saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. And what I would sort of say when I think through kind of all the people I mentioned, Tom was the first person to kind of help me become, or at least, achieve some of the potential that I have. I wouldn't say I've achieved all the potential I have, because I don't think any of us does. But I mean, he really believed me and he let me be me. And I think that's a big piece of that. That's a big piece that he nurtured that, without, hurting my self-esteem, or my ego or any of those things. And he was a guy, when he said stuff, I would listen. So, I mean, super impactful.
The impact that he made on you, and I could tell by the way that you're talking about it, and obviously because you built a company with him and you were part of something very big and independent and awesome, I could tell that there's meaning. Maybe just, were there pieces of advice or different characteristics or different traits that really rubbed off that have helped curate the way that you lead the teams that you have led for so many years?
Absolutely. So one is, Tom is a guy that, would sort of do, he could both quantify opportunities, as also check your, people's gut or conviction around things. So he was both, heart and brain around things. But the biggest thing he did would be like, what do you think is right? And so you would sort of have to sort of, propose something, defend something, and then he would just give you the steering wheel and let you go do it. And honestly, when I think back to the digital things that we did early on, we had these two large clients. We had Southwest Airlines and we had Blockbuster. And Tom said, look, I'm going to give you money. Go test some stuff, go break some shit. And
love that.
That gave me the confidence to go try some things and fail on some things and go learn. And I think that's a big piece of it, is I do think, giving people enough rope to kind of, go do things, but also, I wouldn't say accountability necessarily, but I would say, holding them accountable to the kinds of expectations, the way things should be done. And he would constantly challenge us. He would say things like, I could do more on a Monday night football game than you guys can do in digital. Beat that, And so I would have to sort of figure out and come back creatively to figure out how to do that. And it took us a long time to figure out things. But, he also was the kind of person that said, meet with everybody that wants to meet with you. Make time for those kinds of relationships. Learn about solutions. Ask questions. Don't just simply talk. So there were a lot of little things that I learned from him, and I watched his care. Not only did he treat the people inside the company like family, he treated partners like family. And there was this kind of relationship that he had with people in the industry that he realized that we were all part of trying to help clients market their products and services better. And he found a way to get them engaged and also, part of, helping solve. And the other thing is, it was more like breeding empathy for the client. And you could see that when you have that kind of karma, that it's a game changer. You feel like you're part of a team.
It sounds like he inherently trusted his people by
Yes.
giving empathy to his employees, by giving empathy to his partners. It sounds like just the impact of trust, respect, and just, hey, here are the keys. Take me on a drive. Let's see if you can get there quicker. And
yes. And then you had to prove things out. I mean, by the same token, but he also didn't punish if you made a mistake. No, it was always interesting. So one of the things we learned early on when we made mistakes, we developed a technique we called game filming. And what we would try to do is, it's no different than, how you think about slow motion. We would go back and sort of, look at things in a very analytical way and say, okay, how did this thing break down? And what do we do to keep it from breaking down in the future? Or how do we fix it in the future? How do we solve? And I always love that approach. And, intellectualizing mistakes, versus punishing them, and trying to, think through how you could be better in a way that, didn't make people feel small or,
that's really important. So that to me, not making people feel small. it's having your own self-confidence, your own self-worth, and realizing that giving people those opportunities when the pressure for results seem to be relentless. And in our industry, in business, marketing, advertising, the technology component of it, the pressure for results, it's always relentless when it comes to digital media, when it comes to advertising and marketing. But when you're working with all different kinds of teams, partners, clients, how do you keep your teams inspired because of just what you said, that pressure cooker mentality?
Well, this, when you asked me kind of role models, I mean, it was always funny, I was a goalie. And one of the things you learn as a goalie is you have to have a pretty short memory. Because,
that's a good line.
It's a good line. And I think, the key piece, I mean, of all the people in my life, from my father to Bruce to Mark, it's always about looking forward. You can't look back. I mean, you can second guess and shoulda, woulda, couldas. That's a really bad use of energy. And it's always about your next best move and the next things and trying to, dust yourself off the next day and kind of get moving. And I think that's the biggest piece is, that's one. And the other thing is that I just don't believe in staying static. Always be learning, always be, making mistakes, creating a culture where there's not a right answer, but, also there's not a wrong answer too. I mean, I think that's okay, so.
I love the line of don't stay static. I joined a startup that was really small, that got big, that went public, that then got acquired by a giant company. And I was still relatively young, and people were like, wow, why don't you just stay at that big company? Why don't you stay at Adobe? Wonderful company, great company. But for me, I didn't want to stay static, so to speak, in my career, where just understanding and knowing like that there's so much change and innovation taking place and being able to just reinvent myself. And when you think about different career defining moments for you, whether it's a pivot, a failure, you let a soccer ball get through your fingertips, you stopped a bunch of balls, I'm sure. Like, what are some examples that changed your trajectory or that helped inspire you, the people around you?
Well, I have two funny stories that were pivotal for me. And the first one was, when I got out of business school, I went to work in consulting. I worked for what is now Accenture. It was Anderson Consulting back then.
Sure.
And, I had to wear a coat and tie, and I was working in Silicon Valley. It was our HQ office. And it was literally during the .com, bubble as it was happening. And I did not want to wear a suit. I wanted to have a dip in my mouth, and, I wanted to wear shorts, and I did not, I wanted to work in a fast-paced business. And so I literally kind of turned in my badge and kind of, went back to Texas. And so I think the first piece was, and I remember my father telling me I was an idiot, but, I finally found, like, I knew what I wanted. And so that was a big one, was that this is the first time in my career where I didn't do something that my parents had put in my head or my father had put in my head about what I should be doing. He always said, you should be a brand manager at Procter & Gamble or Nestle or someplace like, so.
Legacy advertising guy.
That's right. And so that was number one, was the first time I made a decision for me. And I actually took the money out of it. So that was number one. And then I would say number two, Blockbuster is a funny story. So I was head of business development at Blockbuster. And so I started our DVD by mail service that was competitive against Netflix. Before it was Blockbuster Online. We had a kind of a skunkworks project, but I also did a lot of investments, and it was like my Vietnam. I mean, I failed in pretty much 3 out of 4 things. And we did end up getting funding from Viacom, what became Blockbuster Online. But eventually I was sort of asked to kind of part ways with the company. But they did it in a very interesting way, as I worked for Camelot and Blockbuster for a year. And so they basically very politely said, hey, this guy, Tom Callahar, wants you to go work over there. We'll each pay 50% of your salary. And, when I first met Tom, I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why am I being traded teams? And,
Right.
like, you know what I mean? I was sort of like, the whole thing was so bizarre to me. But I went to lunch with Tom, and he was very personal about it. And we went to lunch for like 7 or 8 months, every month. And he would, he just was very plain spoken and very straightforward. And it was a very sleepy little agency. And I thought, this is a guy that I could work for. And this is a guy I can learn something from, and I can learn a trade. And that was very important to me. And so those two decisions for me was, again, I think, the first one is really more about doing things for yourself. The second one is you do need to seek out people, that bring out the best in you. And for some reason, I had an instinct around Tom. And there was certainly a paternal instinct, but I also felt like he could be a coach, a mentor, he could push me as well as pull me and those kinds of things. And so those two things were really important. But look, when I went to Camelot, I was 35. I was having, my second kid, I should say my wife's having a second kid, and I was supported. But I mean, I wasn't really sure where my career or anything was going. And I made there were some bets. And I think at the end of the day, it took me till I was 35 to figure out kind of like what I was halfway decent at, and so
It's earlier than most, though.
It is. I mean, look, and I it certainly was lucky. I've certainly been very lucky in a lot of things, but I think at the end of the day, I do think, you have to make choices. I think a lot of people do things because there's perceptive value in things.
Sure.
I have to go to this school. I got to work for this company. I got to do this thing, yada, 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 because that's what our expectation is versus about satisfaction. So this is a great point. Tom, we had a wild conversation early on, and Tom asked me a question that I didn't understand. He said, tell me about your level of satisfaction. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, what makes you satisfied? And I said, I still don't understand the question. And he said, well, I really don't believe, he said, I can't make you happy. He said, but satisfaction comes when you're having needs met. And he said, what will make you satisfied? And what things do you prioritize to create your satisfaction in life? And I thought about that for a while. And I was like, well, I want something I can do that I feel good about, that I know that I can see the fruits of my labor. Like, I need it to be fast moving because I'm, ADHD and whatever. And I said, I also value family time and work-life balance. And I said, I want to learn. I don't want to stay still. And I said, I'd like to be able to, be compensated fairly. But I was like, here's kind of what I need to meet my needs. And what Tom came back with is from a salary perspective, he beat my salary needs by 5%. And I asked him, and I said, why did you choose that number? And he said, well, I exceeded your level of satisfaction. And he said, if I do that, then I know, I'm invested in you. And I always thought about that. I was like, okay, I get it. Right. So some of this is, I think a lot of people shoot very high versus sort of like, what do you need to meet kind of your needs and, those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I mean, kind of wild. I learned a lot about that. And look, over time, you can start to figure out, when you start to interview people, like, what do you need to be not happy, but satisfied? Right.
So over the past, call it roughly 20 years since then, what were some of those learnings that you then took with you from Tom that you have helped others that consider you their mentor?
I think, well, one is, I always Tom was gracious with his time, and I try to be gracious with my time. And I don't say no to people unless someone is approaching me in a very, transactional way or, in a way or I think is disingenuous. So I think, that's the first piece is Tom invested time in that. I think the second piece in all of this is, you've got to learn and try things. And over the years, we've tried a lot of things, and, timing is everything in every business. So, and Tom, you always talk about this. If you're asking the wrong question, you inevitably get the wrong answer. So I think over time, learning how to ask better questions. And so it's interesting, like in the media business we're in now, Tom had an axiom that we talked about a lot. He said, you can't expand what you haven't tested, but you can't test anything unless it can expand, or something along those lines. And so it caused you to think a little bit about the kinds of partners you wanted to be in. You always talked about having principles in terms of the kinds of media that you wanted to run. So it was less about the tech and more about what was important to you. We always said logged in users were really important to us. You didn't need 1,000 partners if you had a handful of the right kinds of partners, doing the right kinds of things, the services you need to provide. You could go deep with them. And so I think that was right. Bringing your partners in, into the tent with you, always really important. And I think anyone that's worked with me or Camelot or PMG, quite frankly, they know that. I mean, we're not, it's full contact partnership, and that's good. So, I mean, there's just probably the one that I would tell your listeners that I think is really interesting. Tom had a great expression around pitching business. And he always said, your right to keep a business is defined on how you earn them. And so if you think about that, we saw lots of agencies early on that would just pitch. I mean, swing at everything. All right. And, and so they would come in the agency and then leave the agency just as fast as they came in. If it was pitched on price, you would lose on price, all that kind of stuff. So we were always very selective about kind of the clients who we had a right to win with. We had a right to operate in people that we knew that we could help them. If I didn't think we could help them or provide differentiation, not worth the time. And so there was a lot of Tomisms. He always said, don't administrate, communicate.
I like that one a lot.
It's great. I mean, we had a whole bunch of that stuff around the walls of the agency. And, I think about all those things all the time. I mean, how many times in big companies do you see just stuff going on Slack or whatever? And, here's the policy, these are humans you're dealing with,
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
What, you're moving a life insurance somewhere or health insurance somewhere? Like what? You know what I mean? Like that stuff freaks people out,
Totally. How do you personally stay so curious and energized after a few decades in this business and just working across many different verticals, many different people, having all different kinds of clients and partners? Or is that the success and the secret?
Look, I tell people the business we're in a fashion business, and it's really fun to be, trying to maintain the fashion of the day. And I think it's important not to be wedded to, any ideology or anything, and that you constantly have to evolve. And I think the newness of it all, every day there's something new. I also love the cast of characters in our industry. I mean, we just have great people.
Yep.
And, and there's not one prototypical person. I think it's a combination of marketing, technology. There's so many interesting people with different skill sets. So that makes it interesting. But it is fundamentally a very human business because, when you're in the marketing business, you're trying to talk to other humans. And, at the end of the day, you're solving very basic kinds of things. These are not, by the way, that's what I laugh about this business. It's not complex.
No.
It's just, but you are trying to deal with behavioral change. And it is all about behavioral change in some way, shape, or form, both inside your agency, with your clients, and with consumers. And so, how fast can people adapt,
So adaptability, you and I, before we hit record, we were talking about, you had used a term that bells went off, lights went off in the sense of unlearning, because why don't you explain this a little bit? It's simple. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, every day, you and I were talking about it, and I was saying that every day I learn something and I go, oh shit, that's wildly different than the way we did it. And we have to, that's the way it's moving towards. And so you do have to unlearn things. And I think the bigger piece of it is like, look, they're just, there are tectonic shifts every single day. And so, if you're too rigid about anything, you're not going to evolve or adapt. And so I do think unlearning is important. And I think about what was important in the early days, like if you take a platform like a Meta, for example,
Yep.
the things that were true when we first started running campaigns in Meta could not be more different than today. And that's the truth in just about every medium and everything that we're doing. And so it all evolves. And the question is, are you going to adapt as it evolves? Or are you going to, be stuck in how it was? And I think that's the biggest piece, is like, there's no reason to. And I think at the end of the day, and it's a little bit how I feel about everything. I mean, elections, you look at an election, 50% of the people voted for somebody, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean? So
Yep.
that's the way it is. You can want it to be different, but that's the way it is. And I think in our business, things evolve, and you either, get your surfboard and decide to surf those waves,
Yep.
or you're going to drown,
Absolutely. And there's no in between, actually. That's what I've picked up on throughout my career. There's no in between. You're either you fall off your surfboard and you whine and cry, or you get right back up and you ride the next wave and you enjoy the wave.
That's right. But look, one thing that's clear to me, though, is if you do love surfing, you got to get 10,000 waves in. I mean, you got to ride a lot of waves, and, there's, and I think that's the piece of this that's important is you don't learn unless you do. And that goes hand in hand. You got to do.
Okay. So I was just about to ask you this question. If you could give one single piece of guidance, advice to folks within our ecosystem, and just people that are younger, ambitious in their career, would it be you got to do, or would it be amazing? Yeah.
No, for certain. I mean, look, so I'll tell you, I deal with first of all, we're at that age where all my friends, kids are graduating from college and they're all looking for their first jobs. And what I say, hey, have you ever been in a Google console or a Facebook console? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, maybe that's a start. And I was like, you realize you can go do Blueprint at Facebook, or you can go to Google University and, learn how to use, AdWords or Google Analytics or any of these tools. Like, you can go learn how to run a TikTok campaign. And so my point on this is that this comes back to the do versus, say you want something. And so I that's the piece on this, is get your hands on the wheel. And, and then you do run into kids, like I'll run into kids here all the time. They're like, oh yeah, I had a business on the side. I was, did creator content or whatever, and I'd be like,
love it.
Okay, tell me about that.
Love it. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So I think there's no. I don't think look. I mean, we're in an age right now where things have never been more accessible than any other time. I mean, tools, platforms. So I know that there's a 23-year-old kid out there who's like 10 times smarter than I am, and probably, has figured something out, but, because they've gotten their hands on a platform or something and are learning stuff. And so again, that's sort of my point, is like, go do. And I think that makes you, that sharpens your knife a lot,
Keep on sharpening that knife. Why do you believe that external mentor, beyond hearing what someone says in between four walls, is so critical to people's career?
Well, look, I mean, I think the first piece I'd sort of say is, I always tell young people that you got to go find people that you just absolutely adore and admire and are obsessed with. And when you do that, this is like a sport, and you can learn from them. And I always think about the great Bear Bryant quote. He always said, when you get to the end zone, act like you've been there. And so, if you really throw yourself into that and you find people that are doing interesting things, they're going to treat you like a peer, and if you can engage with them and you understand what they're doing, you can ask good questions, you can do that. And then you have a very different kind of relationship with those kinds of people. And I that's why I'd encourage, as it relates to mentors, find people that are doing things that you just absolutely adore or are wild about. And I think those people, while I'm sure you'll, over time, as you get to know them, you probably see, they're humans just like you are, and they have something to teach you, and I think, I also think having people outside your parents are important, that can see you without all the baggage too,
Right.
and see you where you are in that state and time. I mean, that's a big piece I think about that a lot. Where I am as a 57-year-old guy is very different than where I was at 35, which is different than where I was at 23. And people that see you kind of here and now, it's the real world equivalent is, every year I try to go to the UK and go to soccer games. My wife always says, I always say, hey, I'm going to take a random group of people from the industry. And she says, why would you want to go travel with a bunch of random people? And I'm like, because I don't know them. And I'm going to spend times in trains, planes, pubs. I want to get to know them. I'm like, the guy from middle school, he knows me. He knows me as ex-kid from middle school, right?
Totally.
So that's sort of the piece of it I'd sort of say to people is, the relationships evolve. And I think when you think on mentors, the person that was a mentor is my high school soccer coach. I loved him. He was incredible for me then. It doesn't mean he's going to mentor me now. And so I think that evolves too. And when I think about people like in recent years, Dave Morgan, been hugely impactful in my career. And I sought Dave out because he was a guy that really understood the media landscapes. I'm always doing that. I'm always trying to find something. We talked about Jonah Goodhart. I mean,
Yep.
Jonah's a guy that I see reinventing himself, and he's been
Absolutely.
successful entrepreneurially. And
so much respect for Jonah.
Yeah, and I want some of that pixie dust. And there are people that you're like, how do you deal with this? These things, the changing world around you. And I love that, by the way, that to me, human performance, when you see people that are also performing at high levels, it's super interesting to see that.
At the highest level, but also that consistent curiosity and wanting to be able to evolve. Like we talked about, it's adapting with the times, it's evolving with the times, and it's riding the wave and understanding like, wait, I've done this wave. I might fall off, but I'm gonna get right back on.
Yeah, 150%. And look, I mean, I think the piece on this is a lot of people, there's nostalgia about things. And, my father always told me, like I asked him when he sold his agency, did he feel bad? And he said, no. And he said, in fact, I'm glad that our name is off the door because it's, there are lots of things that aren't permanent, and he said, things evolve. And I think about that all the time. I just think, look, I mean, you can argue whether a person is an artifact of the time period or that the time period shapes the person. And I think, you've got to, that you've got to take advantage of where you are in that point in time and kind of, use all the resources you can. And that the most important one is the thing between your ears. And that's the thing you got to keep sharp, and you got to, constantly, meet people that challenge, make your brain hurt a little bit. Right. So,
Sam, this has been an awesome conversation. Throughout the dialogue, you've made my brain hurt, and I appreciate that. I hope that I assure you that you've curated some tingles in other people's brains as well. And create some crinkles and wrinkles. Yeah, Brother Bloom, this is great. We'll do this in person next time. Thank you. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks,
goodbye.
everybody. Oh, goodbye.